Watch me ride.
Well, good morning. It's not even 9 o'clock. And today I need to do a video for a subscriber. Basically, they are new to riding and they're finding engine braking a bit tricky, and they sort of want me to go over some basic things. So I thought I'd just explain, you know, what it is, how it works, and how you use it. And hopefully that might help you understand, anyone else who comes across this video, to help understand it a bit better. Okay, so there's some mechanical basics that I want to explain about engine braking. And I think the best way to understand something is to understand how it works and why it works, and then how you use it, because you'll understand how it works and how you can use it. So in basic terms, an engine has a maximum RPM, revolutions per minute. It doesn't matter what top speed you're doing, the engine is never going to rev more than what it could do in first. So these numbers aren't correct, but I'm going to make this sort of rounded for you to understand. So say the engine is at its maximum RPM. In first gear, it would do, say, 100 RPM revolutions per minute on the rear wheel. So the engine's just its maximum speed, but the back wheel was doing 100 RPM. You put it in second, it will do 200 RPM, but the engine won't change the revs that it's going. So that's, you understand that's how an engine and a gearbox works, you know, it's ratios. So the engine RPMs and the speed that the rear wheel spins are connected, but they are in stages because they're in gears. So the higher the gear, the faster the back wheel will spin. Now this is where engine braking comes in. Basically, say you're in fourth and you're going along, you let the throttle off, and the engine's at half its RPM range for the speed you're coasting along at. If you go into third, you're then going to decrease the maximum speed that the bike can do with the engine at that certain level. That's why the revs fly up. It sounds complicated. So in the most extreme example of engine braking, if you were going along at, say, 40-50 miles an hour and you drop down several gears, you're going to reduce the rotational speed of your rear wheel to slower than the bike is moving forwards, and it'll actually cause the rear wheel to skid. But it won't skid stopped, it will be just turning slower, so it will be going as it goes. Now, we don't want to do that, but that's the extreme version. So engine braking is just using the engine itself and the maximum RPMs it wants to go under compression of the engine, because you've got throttle off, so it's just the engine's compression that's slowing you down. And it basically slows you down very gradually. That's sounding complicated even to me, so I'm just going to show you it in practice, but you'll understand. I'm going to sit right up here and then I'm going to drop down a gear. So going along, let off the throttle, go down a gear. You notice how it went brrr. It's because as it changed down gear, and the clutch was re-engaged, the engine had a peak in RPMs as it got lifted up by the speed of the rear wheel, but that resistance slowed the bike down gradually. When you let off the throttle, you are getting engine braking. You see, the numbers are going down, but you can increase that amount of slowdown by reducing the gear you're in, dropping a gear. So look, we're slowing, I'll go down 2 gears. So I just dived. I'm on the throttle, off the throttle, clutch in, down the gear, let the clutch out. No throttle on. And so you just got to make sure that you're smooth as you let it back out. Blipping. Now, you might notice that when I or some other people downshift will go, there's a little rim on the throttle. Now what we're doing there is actually increasing the RPM of the engine. So as we then change down a gear, it becomes a smoother transition. So it's like the revs go up, because that's what they're going to do when you engine brake anyway, but you quickly put them up there, so they go up and then they come down lower than they were before because you've lowered a gear in the middle of that. Now the way you do that is really hard to explain, but basically just know that I'm pulling the clutch in, blipping the throttle and letting the clutch out. And at the point that the clutch is its furthest point in, that I'm going to pull it, which is only about halfway the travel of the clutch, I'm dropping a gear. So to my hands, it looks like this. So I'll show you an example here. See, I've just massively reduced the jerkiness of the engine braking by just putting that little blip in the middle. Now that's a more advanced thing that you'll need to fully understand riding and engine braking before you try and do that, because unless you do it just right, it won't really work. To some people that will come completely naturally and you'll just understand it. See, it doesn't have to be used aggressively, just to slow you down a little bit and prepare yourself for the next corner because you want a lower gear. That's just something you'll get to know, what gear you want to be in for what corner. It sets you up, it slows you down, it stops you using your brakes. Should be good enough run up in here. Right, so I'm in third. I'm going to go down 2 gears and dump the clutch. Now it didn't squeal, but what I did feel was the back wheel go as it was slowing down enough to lock. Let's try that a little bit more aggressively. Now listen, you might hear the engine not pick up immediately. So did you hear that sort of bit of silence before it went rrrr? That's basically where the rear wheel was spinning, but just basically skidding. So do you understand what I'm saying here? So I'm going along, clutch in, down a gear, let clutch out, I'm slowing down a bit. When do you use engine braking? Well, approaching corners is a good time. Just in general riding, you know, you're using it anyway. When you let off the throttle, that is engine braking. But you just increase the power of it by dropping a gear. But when it's particularly handy is when it's wet. Now you should know this, but 90% of the braking power of a bike is in the front wheel. And you should be using 70% of your front brake versus 30% of your rear. Those numbers vary between who trains you, but you know, you should be using a combination of the two. Now the reason for that is when you brake on the front, your weight goes forwards and pushes the front tyre harder into the ground. As that's happening, though, the rear tyre is getting unloaded. Because you know, if you go hard enough for the brakes, you're going to do a stoppie. If you're braking with your rear at that time, with the actual brake, it can lock, because if you're a bit too sort of heavy with it, because there's no weight holding that tyre into the ground. So when it's wet, if you use the engine braking earlier, it can reduce your speed for you in a very controlled manner that's not likely to skid, because you know it's kind of got this cushion of the engine that's stopping it from skidding, which means when you do start applying rear brake, you're going a slower speed and it's less likely to lock up. If the front wheel skids, you're in real trouble. There isn't a lot you can do about it, but hope to hell that you somehow keep it upright. If the rear wheel skids, it's fine. You know, if you're on a corner, it's not so great. But if you're going in a straight line, the bike will weave around a bit, but generally it's going to want to come back in line with the front wheel. So you should now understand how engine braking works, why it works, what the benefits of it are, and really how to use it. Practice is the key. This is the thing. I get lots of questions about people saying, you know, oh, I'm riding okay, but I'm having problems with this, or I'm having problems with that. Practice. Just keep practicing. Engine braking is not a particularly difficult one to learn because it's kind of so natural that you let off the throttle, it starts working. Clutch in, gear down, let it out slowly, it slows you down even more. And it can be very, very effective. And it can also save your butt. I'll give you an example of how engine braking once saved my butt. I was riding a mate's SV650. He'd been out of the country. This is DME Vlogs. His SV. And he'd been out of the country in Saudi for a while. And his SV just sat there and he came back, jumped on it. Thought, you know, the brakes feel a bit iffy. But didn't really think too much of it, which is a very normal thing to happen. If you haven't ridden your own bike in a long time, you're like, this seems right, but is this right? Is it not right? And it's hard to tell. Well, anyway, turns out the braking system, I'm sure it was full of air, but it had some other problems, and he'd warned me when I rode it didn't have many brakes. But I really didn't realise how few brakes it had. Well, anyway, it came to a point on the ride where I needed to slow down. It wasn't like an emergency situation or anything, but I needed to slow down for this turning point. And I'm braking and nothing is happening, and I'm going to overshoot it, and I was just like, So all you do then is you pull the clutch in, you stamp down a couple of gears, and you slowly let that clutch out. Because it was a V-twin engine, that's something I'll quickly touch on in a second. It had lots and lots of engine braking, and it really brought the bike down to a stop. Enough for the failing brakes to help it. So what I was just saying about engines then, different engines have different types of engine braking. Some is more powerful, some it isn't. Generally, the less cylinders the bike has, pistons, the more powerful the engine braking will be, generally. If you're riding a 125, almost definitely going to be a single cylinder, and they have good engine braking. This is also a single cylinder, a 440cc one, and this has got fantastic engine braking because it's so big. V-twins, again, good engine braking. An inline 4 does have engine braking, it's like a sports bike engine, but it doesn't have nearly as much power. Here's an example of engine braking going down a hill, just rolling. Now if I go down a gear, I'm being slowed down. If I go up a gear, I speed up slightly. That's because I'm reducing the resistance on the engine rather than increasing it. Engine braking is not a replacement for an emergency brake. You still do that the exact same way your trainer will teach you. However, in a non-emergency situation, engine braking can be like an emergency brake. I'll do it here. So front brake. So I've just gone down a couple of gears, really slowed the bike down, but I haven't clamped on the front brake, so there was no risk if it was wet that the front wheel was going to slip out. Savvy? Now there's one thing I forgot to mention, so I'm going to shove it in right now, and that is the fact that when you're engine braking, you're not showing any brake lights, obviously, if you're not pulling any brakes. That can cause you problems because people don't realise that you can slow down without using the brakes. Like here, I've just slowed down quite a bit, not touched the brake to do that. There was no red light shown to the rear. I can do the same thing, but just slightly pull the front brake on. And now, if anyone was behind me, which there isn't, they would know that I was braking. Now there are some applications of engine braking into racing, but very often they'll use slipper clutches, which basically stop the bike from engine braking so much and smooth it out. So they have to use their brakes to slow themselves down because the engine is not doing anything for them. But that's not something you need to worry about on your 125. You have not got a slipper clutch. And if it is slipping, well, you've got an issue. Well, there you go, I hope that helped. I have lots more videos on helping new riders out. There's a playlist on my channel. Just subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out the playlists, and hopefully anything you're worried or wondering about will be answered there. And if it isn't, drop me a comment and I will consider making a video on it, as I am just about to make another video about hill starts. Catch you next time.